It's, can I just say it's warmer in here than it has been?
Yeah, what happened?
Thank you very much.
We froze.
And next week, so it just changes
It
on
was
its own.
freezing last time.
The city paid their gas bill finally.
That's what it was.
We can thank the city council. The city council approved the budget last night
Oh,
and
is that what it was?
included the
They
heat.
pay the natural gas bill.
Now they can pay the bill.
I think I can survive without this.
Your property taxes are going up though, but that's a given.
That's true. We paid the bill. That's it. We paid our own bill.
Yeah, we're live on YouTube, so you guys can get started whenever you're ready.
Are we ready?
Yep.
Marie, we ready to go?
Yes, we are.
All right. My glasses on. Welcome, everyone, to the North Logan Planning Commission meeting on January 19th, 2023. Jeff will say our pledge and Dwight will give us a prayer.
Okay. Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our beloved eternal heavenly Father, as we bow before thee this night and to begin our planning commission meeting, we're grateful for the privilege and opportunity which we have to assemble together without concern or restrictions. We're grateful for the many blessings we do enjoy in this part of thy vineyard. We're thankful for this great land and for our leaders, city and state, and grateful for all the blessings that we do receive as we endeavor to serve thee. We're grateful for the opportunity to counsel together this night. We humbly pray for thy spirit to guide us, direct us, that our thoughts and minds might be clear and we might be able to represent the citizens of this great city in a manner pleasing and acceptable unto thee and to them. Thank thee again for the privilege and opportunity of serving and doing the things we can to help improve the quality of life for all the citizens of North Logan. And we say these things humbly and gratefully in the name of thy beloved Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff and Dwight. We need a motion to approve the agenda for tonight. Anybody?
I so move.
Okay, and a second here has moved to approve the agenda. We need a second.
Second.
Jeff seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the agenda has been approved. No minutes, Marie? I
There are
can't-
minutes.
Oh, okay. Last time I looked, I didn't see them. Where were they? So we need to approve the minutes for
November 17th.
November 17th. Everybody had a chance to read them
I did.
online.
I'm good with them.
Okay, we need a motion.
I'll make a motion. We approve the minutes from November 17th, 2022.
I second that.
Second,
Who did it?
Dwight.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of November 17th, 2022. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, great. Follow-up issues on our previous meeting, Scott?
Okay, so during our last meeting, we talked about a couple of ordinances. The first of which was to adopt a new amendment to the moderate income housing plan of our general plan. We did hold a public hearing on that at city council last night, and they did move to adopt those amendments. So that has been finalized, and we'll be working with the state to report that update, make sure we meet that deadline for the state mandated updates to our moderate income housing plan. So that one went through, and then also the flood damage prevention ordinance that we were working on, bringing our ordinance up to FEMA and state standards for any properties within our special hazard areas. That was also reviewed by the city council last night and adopted as well. And then lastly, we had on city council's agenda last night to appoint and reappoint planning commissioners for upcoming terms. So as you guys may be aware, Commissioner Whitaker is stepping down at the end of his term, which is the end of this month. So this is Dwight's last meeting. And in Dwight's place, Commissioner Erickson will be moving up into a regular member position. And then the mayor extended an invitation to Teresa Tyre to fill the alternate role. And then lastly, Commissioner Coleman was reappointed to a new 3-year term. So those are the updates for the Planning Commission. Those went through last night, and your new terms will actually start at the beginning of February. So we'll have Commissioner Whitaker here for our last meeting with us, and then we'll have Commissioner Tyre with us at the next meeting. So those are the updates I have for you. Do you guys have any questions on those topics?
Any questions? No questions. Thank you, Scott.
Yep.
Okay, we would just like to recognize Dwight's last meeting with us and thank him for his service on the commission. Dwight, we appreciate your insight and your thoughtful comments, and we're going to miss you.
Oh, that's cute.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your patience and understanding. And I think there's been good dialogue, and it's been a wonderful experience for me. Appreciate all of your kindnesses that you've extended. And I broke the rule of remaining silent and have people think you're, less than you are, and opened my mouth and proved that was the true case. But anyway, it's been a great experience, and I again appreciate the opportunity to be of service here.
What are you going to do in retirement?
Gonna look for another job.
I don't know if you're going to find a better paying one.
Yeah.
I know. It'll be hard, Dwight.
No,
We actually have some photos of what Commissioner Whitaker is up to and what he will
Yeah.
be up to. So he's on the board for the Cache Valley Humanitarian Center. He's going to focus his time and attention to that effort, working on all sorts of humanitarian efforts of local nonprofits. So we wish him luck in that effort. You can see he's engaged in a good cause, and we'll be sad to lose him, but he's obviously busy. So we'll thank him for his time, appreciate him for his time, and let him continue on to other endeavors. But kind of a fun cause he's engaged in with that humanitarian center.
yeah. Well, thanks to the staff
Awesome.
too. It's been great to welcome you, Scott, and Alan, Maria, and everybody else. Been fantastic to work with. So appreciate that. But yeah, we're my wife and I a couple of years ago started a nonprofit corporation that's just to try to help the poor, needy, low income, poverty level families in the area. If there was a need, just very briefly, community centered, needs based. So we don't make anything that some organization, school districts, or there's we were networking with 26 nonprofit organizations and the 3 school districts. Cache Valley, we consider Wellsville to Preston. So Preston School District, the Cache County School District, and Logan City School Districts. So putting together such things as back to school kits for students who need those kinds of supplies, hygiene kits, and coat and quilt drives, help provide clothing for students who are in need there. And the most recent emphasis is we're making sleeping mats for the homeless out of recycled grocery bags. Lee's Market, marketplace here in Logan and also Smithfield, has receptacles for the bags. And you can see there, we delivered 25 sleeping mats to the new warming center here in Logan. And the Cache County School District, surprisingly enough, has ordered 12 of these sleeping mats. They have identified 98 students in their district that are homeless. And Cache Valley has identified over 200 people in Cache Valley that are homeless. So there are problems, there are needs, and we're just trying to help fill those needs so that people are a little more comfortable. But what's it called? Cache Valley Humanitarian Center. And you can check out the website, it's cachevalleyhumanitariancenter.org. Yeah. Or .com, I'm sorry. .com, yeah.
Dwight, thank you.
You bet.
That is,
Thank you.
that's awesome. We appreciate your work and appreciate the work of your committee there. And those mats look pretty interesting. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, it takes about 600 bags to make a mat and a pillow to go with it. And Commissioner Coleman has been an active participant in contributing bags and things to he and his wife, so along with others. So
Great.
appreciate.
How long does it take to, is it weaving, is it
Yeah.
folding, or is it, what do you?
Yes, we purchased we have two looms to make those mats. What you do is you get the plastic bag, grocery bag. Sorry for the paid commercial advertisement here, but the question was asked, so I have to respond. Anyway, you take the plastic bag, you cut the handles off, you cut the bottom off, so that gives you a loop. You link those together in links of about 20 of those loops, and then that makes a plarn, plastic yarn, if you will. And then they're able to be weaved through those looms. And it takes about 30 hours, labor hours of volunteers to weave one mat.
Hmm.
So very labor intensive.
Wow.
And they're
Awesome.
they're fairly.
They're
functional,
they're comfortable to sleep on. There's some studies have been made that it improves the body temperature by 30 to 40 degrees versus sleeping directly on the ground. So, and they're easily sanitized, water resistant, that kind of thing. I haven't tried to see whether you can use them for a float or not. But anyway, that's what we're currently working on right now with a major project.
Thank you,
for sharing.
Dwight. Makes us appreciate what we've got. Wow. All right, let's move on to our business. We have some work sessions tonight. This is not a public hearing. No one gets to talk because it's not a public hearing except us. So we're happy to have you here. It's a public meeting. You get to listen to us discuss back and forth. So let's go on to number 2 on our agenda. Scott, do you want to introduce us to this one?
Yep, so we've talked about this once in the past, prior to the holidays, and then took a hiatus while we had some commissioners out of town and coming and going in the busy season. So we're coming back to this topic to have some more discussion on it. In our initial discussion back in November, we had some consensus, some concern, and we've had some input from planning commissioners. We've also had the mayor and city council members express interest in the topic. Not necessarily direction on the topic, but they're curious about it and they're interested to see, what your recommendation may be as we move through it. One of the things, I think the biggest thing that came up during our last discussion was more on the topic of the large warehouse type storage. As you'll recall, we're looking at a couple of uses: small self-storage and then large warehouse type storage. And looking at the original proposal, let me see if I can zoom in on this just a little bit more. The original red line had showed a large warehouse type storage as being stricken as a conditional or permitted use in the general commercial zone. And that was maybe a point of concern. I think Commissioner Coleman had mentioned wanting to think on that a little bit more and understand its impact. And the more time we've spent thinking about it, I appreciate his cause for concern. I think it may have been a little bit too wide of a red pen on that first go, and it was good to take a minute to think through. One thing that I had looked at in the meantime, there's in your packet, the second document in, you'll see the zoning map, and I'll pull it up on the screen here so you can follow along on your paper copy. Put together a couple of exhibits just to see generally what certain setbacks would look like. As you may recall, our existing language indicates that no storage units or large warehouse type storage is permitted within 330 feet of both Main Street and 2500 North. This exhibit shows the zoning layer turned on plus a 330-foot buffer in this cross-hatched yellow area. And if you go one page down, I've taken off that zoning layer to help you see the built environment underneath. 330 feet is the equivalence of a half a block. And on the very south side here, just to give you some context and some scale, Walmart's here in this larger building on the very south end of town, their parking lot, and then here's that 330-foot buffer. And then the Kohl's building, the Pickler here, and then Cow Ranch. You can see that 330 feet is essentially just the first little bit of their parking lot area. It's where the new fuel station is located for Walmart when and if that goes forward. But it's just kind of that first buffer in a larger commercial zone like general commercial. And then just again, for a little bit more context, the next couple of exhibits show a 660-foot buffer, or one block is that equivalent. And then the most extreme at the bottom here is 1320. So that's 2 blocks. So as a reminder, our language as it currently exists, if we don't change anything, would be these first couple of exhibits where these 2 uses are not permissible. Although the zoning underneath that buffer does permit those uses, either permitted or conditionally permitted. What I wanted to do with this, just visual analysis, is just to get a sense of scale, get a sense of context, help you guys understand what we're talking about when we throw those numbers out for setbacks, and trying to preserve frontage on Main and 2500 for potential retail opportunities, food and beverage opportunities, maybe something that isn't quite as stagnant as warehousing or storage. We kind of talked about 2500 North being a primary entrance to the city. It's where 10th West and 6th West dead end on 2500. It's the only way to get further north unless you go way out west through Benson. So this is an important arterial for us. Main Street is as well. And then what we had discussed is also, North Logan City being the only landlocked municipality in Cache Valley, we don't have room to grow. So we're kind of stuck with what we've got, so to speak. We're landlocked, and our available developable land is something that is more of a scarcity going forward, and we need to look at it as such when we make land use decisions. Also, as a point of reflection, the general plan is 10 years old. And we are moving forward with opening up a new general plan process beginning probably mid-year, depending on funding and a few other things. But the general plan will provide us with a visioning that will re-envision the city as a whole, but also individual areas such as our west end of town and our commercial areas that drive some of that economic base. So as we had kind of talked about back in November, the initial thought was, let's look at a couple of uses in the code in these areas, and let's make sure that we are not leaving the door open before we have some visioning. In this updated exhibit, the first one that you had, it's an updated red line. And I've made a couple of adjustments that I want to talk through and just get your input on. These are just draft, obviously. Pull this open here. When the comment was made about the large warehouse type storage, and maybe it's not something we should strike entirely from the general commercial zone. The thought that I was kind of thinking about is we know that there's a shift in retail demand. We know that there's a change in a lot of e-commerce that's taking off, but there's also a bit of a pause. in e-commerce in the sense of, warehousing is going to become more and more important. But as COVID had shown, it took off like crazy. And now that COVID is over, it's kind of settled. You'll notice on your drive south on I-15, the empty warehouse that Amazon put up in far west, it's just kind of sitting vacant. So they obviously overshot the mark as far as demand, and that demand is settling a bit. I don't think it's going to decrease, but it's not quite as quick maybe as it once was. And the idea of let's preserve our frontages on those two corridors for, retail and or food and beverage, or, maybe more lively uses, was pause for concern, I think, with large warehousing on those corridors. But one thing that we also, or at least I was kind of thinking about during our holiday break, if you go back to your other exhibit, there are actually a couple of use cases here in the valley alone, and there's others elsewhere, where warehousing is being integrated with storefronts, as these retail establishments are becoming more hybrid in their approach, where they have a local presence, but they're also heavily engaged in e-commerce and trying to reach a larger audience online. This example, Camp Saver on Highway 89, it's no longer Camp Saver, actually, they moved, but for several years, they had that retail storefront. It was just a small portion of the building, but they mainly had warehousing and did their distribution out of that building. And I kind of sat and thought about what does that look like? And as I put pen to paper, it looks like it's about 10% of that warehouse that they were actually using for retail purposes. Another case study is also in that vicinity. You may or may not have seen this one. It's off the main thoroughfare. But it's a stationery company, and there's also a Vouray office. They do apparel and clothes, and they have some retail, about 2,500 square feet just in front there, and then warehousing in the rear where they do their distribution. And that was about 13% of the overall building. Another one here in town, Lazy One, they just expanded, and their primary focus there is actually manufacturing and warehousing. But again, they do have a small retail component. It's quite small. I actually drove past and looked in and stopped in and kind of got a mental image of what it looks like. It's only about 2% of that overall building, so it's a fairly small presence, but they do have a local presence. And I know it's a favorite spot for a lot of people, especially around the holidays, picking up their Christmas jammies and stuff. That was a thought that I was wondering about. If, for example, let me go back in. If, for example, we were to continue to allow for large warehouse style storage on those thoroughfares, maybe there's an opportunity to permit those, but also have a local presence as well with, maybe a small amount of retail floor space in addition to warehousing. And that was a thought I wanted to run past you guys. Let me open up this red line again and show you some proposed text that we can toss around. So,
Excuse me, Scott, have we had any issues raised from commercial enterprises
about needing more warehousing and storage?
or vice versa, trying to hybrid, the retail and storage, manufacturing?
No, I haven't had any specific comments from, business owners saying, hey, we need more storage space or we need more opportunities for warehousing. That has not been something that I've heard, but keep in mind, I've been with the city for about 6 months now, and I just haven't had someone come through my office to say, hey, I'm trying to find a space that has more warehousing. I haven't had that. Maybe it has been, but I don't have personal experience with that request. So this language that I put in, this is the section that was existing in our code. It was specific to both the small multi-unit storage and large warehouse type storage. And it's stricken the small warehouse storage as we've discussed, but it leaves in some standards for large warehouse type storage. And I've added some language here for large warehouse type storage facilities that are located in between 330 feet and 660 feet of either of those two corridors, so Main Street or 2500 North, where if they wanted to be in that space, we would say, yeah, go ahead, but we still want to have that retail component, or at least a small portion. And that would be, let's go back to the other exhibit here. That would be between these two. So between 330, so we would leave that language of the 330 not permitting that use. But between 330 and 660, we would say you may do that use. We want to keep, instead of striking it out of the code and saying no, we'd say yes, but we want to have a little bit of retail. Beyond 660, then you can just do standard warehouse type storage without any restrictions or additional requirements. So it's a phased approach to preserving our frontages for retail or maybe higher uses. And then as you get further off the corridors, there's less restrictions and more availability for, you know, those bigger boxier storage types of facilities. Do you have any thoughts or questions on that initial approach to maybe phasing it back from those corridors?
Yeah, I have some thoughts on it. I think that's, I like your comments. I think our city, I can understand why like a carpet store or something would need warehouse space, but also retail space in front. I think to help the city, we would like to have retail along those roads. But I can go with this idea of, you know, let's let them have a warehouse behind. But if we're going to get any kind of revenue at all in our city, we really need to encourage retail, I think, along Main Street.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
what do you
mean, it may not only be a revenue question, it may also be a question of other opportunities for maybe job generation,
Exactly.
other things like that. The way that I've drafted this, so in the first red line, we had stricken this sentence here altogether just to say we're pulling it all out. We're going to say we're not going to have these uses until we go through more visioning with the general plan, and then if there's a demand and a need, maybe we put it back in. But in this iteration, I've left it to just keep that 330-foot buffer. And then I added this second paragraph to have that phased approach to the large warehouse type storage. And then I left in these other requirements for large warehouse that were pre-existing, mostly having to do with landscaping and a few things along those lines for just aesthetics. Do you guys have any other questions or concerns? Are you okay with that direction? Any hesitation with those thoughts? Okay, one other thing I wanted to bring up as I was looking at this, I know that we took a moment to look at just a couple of uses, storage, you know, both large and small. There's another use in the use table that was concerning as I was looking back through this. And again, I have somewhat fresh eyes coming into the city, hadn't read through this until just a few months ago. And then one thing that was also sticking out was this use of solid waste facility. Solid waste facility is exactly what you think it is. It's solid waste, it's refuse, it's, you know, contaminants and all of the above. And it's actually conditionally permitted in both the general commercial and our manufacturing areas. Now, there's obviously EPA standards that would be applicable, and it may be challenging for one of those uses to locate near certain, you know, existing establishments. But I figured, you know, we're already talking about a couple of these uses we're concerned about on those frontages. This was one that seemed like low hanging fruit that we would maybe want to strike just to make sure it's not something that catches us off guard later. Do you have any concern about just adding that to a proposed text amendment?
How narrow is the definition of solid waste
Yeah,
facility?
I'm curious about.
Yeah.
So is a recycling
Let me
business or
let me open up the definition. There's actually a state definition and there's also a definition in our code. Let's see here.
Let's see what our code says.
Yeah. Can you guys read that?
No,
I'm having a hard time reading it here too.
years ago?
I'll zoom in a minute.
not even. That's solid waste.
That's Okay, so these are just a couple of notes I was taking as I was looking at, what exactly is this use and does it impact any of our existing uses? If we were to make a change. So our code's definition of solid waste facility is any solid waste, non-hazardous or hazardous, recycling, sorting, treatment, storage, or disposal facility as defined in the Utah Solid and Hazardous Waste Act. So I was like, well, what does this Utah Solid and Hazardous Waste Act sound like? What is that definition? And this is copy and paste. So solid waste means garbage, refuse, sludge, including sludge from a waste treatment plant, water supply treatment plant, or air pollution control facility, or other discarded material, including solid, liquid, semi-solid, or contained gaseous material resulting from industrial, commercial, mining, or agricultural operations from community activities. Solid waste does not include solid or dissolved materials in domestic sewage or in irrigation return flows or discharges for which a permit is required under Title 19 or under the Water Pollution Control Act. And then C, solid waste does not include metal that is purchased as a valuable commercial commodity, and 2, not otherwise hazardous waste or subject to conditions of the federal hazardous waste regulations, including the requirements for recyclable materials. So it's kind of what you think it is. The only thing in our city, I think that it would impact, let's go to our GIS system, is the Rich's cars and their recycling processes that are behind. And if we were to make this change, it wouldn't mean that they have to stop doing business. It just means that they couldn't expand beyond what they're currently operating. And from what it looks like, they are already about as, let's see, am I going the right way? They're about as expanded as you could get on that parcel. So I'm disoriented here. Rich's is on about 25, right?
And what kind of recycling are they doing?
Just right here. Oh, that's it right here. Yep. So they have the car dealership out front, and then they have the recycling
Well, yeah.
effort back behind.
Recycling of what?
Vehicles. So they
Yes.
take cars, they piece together, whole cars. They take it's not necessarily a chop shop, but it's more of a vehicle recycling and upcycling. They take multiple totaled vehicles and put together new vehicles for sale.
Okay.
So this is the one pre-existing use, I think, would possibly be impacted if they were to try to expand, but they don't have much more land to expand into.
Does the definition of solid waste, would that include composting?
It would be. Technically, compost is recycling, but
like cow manure, that
Would that be considered agri?
it's kind of an agricultural use. It might be protected with the agricultural laws. We can look into some of those specific questions if you'd like to be more specific. I don't know the answer off the top of my head here.
I'm not liking solid waste as sludge and including sludge from waste treatment plants and
It would be a solid waste.
that kind of thing coming anywhere near the city.
So a gaseous material through an agricultural operation might meet that definition. I don't know that we have any of that on Main or on 25. We got a couple of fields, but they're usually, from what I've noticed, more for, hay production and alfalfa production.
So in that case, the farmers are taking their manure waste and scattering it on the fields for fertilizer kind of a thing.
This is a facility, keep in mind. So it is, a physical improvement. I think fertilizing is probably not contained in that definition.
Or like a cycling facility here.
So time for opinions.
Go ahead.
Thoughts?
Yeah.
We'll start with solid waste since we're talking about it. I like the intent of what you're suggesting. I'm a little bit troubled with the all inclusive. And I think there's places in the city that I wouldn't be concerned with the auto part recovery and resale and, you know, those sorts of things might be areas that I'd rather have it than other areas, but so the just all out removal, it's not super excited about that. But I do like the intent. I think it might, for me, it would just require some definitions. Because I noticed up there without exception, I can have a recycle business to recycle metals, but I couldn't plastics.
Because it creates a gas.
As a gas,
So
then we can have gas.
I don't know. So that's where I'm like, I think I could warm up to the idea. It was just going to require, I think, some definitions rather than just an all out throw it out of the city. So that's where I'm at with solid waste. I do appreciate the compromise on the large warehouse. I think that's where my intent or concerns were around with the all out removal of that. So, and I'm okay with the 330, 660 kind of proposal that you threw out there. I think that meets the intent, but allows for flexibility. And so I do like that proposal, and we've talked about that. I do want to address the small.
Before we do that, let's see what anybody else has to say about the large warehouse stuff. Okay, Jeff,
The solid waste. Is that
we'll
right?
start. Yeah, tell us about, anybody have comments on solid waste?
I guess my question would be, if we don't eliminate all, then how do we go in and hand pick what would be allowable? Is that what you're saying? Like,
Yeah,
you're
well,
wanting
I
to,
just-
because
I
then
just think
you.
the
select it like what-
definitions are close.
Yeah,
I hated that recycling just ended with metal.
I see.
So I mean, there's
Recycling.
wood recycling, pallet recycling, and there's places in the community that I wouldn't have an issue with that type of business.
Natural products,
Right,
landscape products, those
right,
types
but
of
it's
things.
not
And
metal
so-
other than nails in there, but
Yeah.
so that's
So
where
just having
we're
that.
close,
definition.
I
Yeah.
think. I just.
Is that an allowable thing to go in and tweak that or make up
well,
our
we can
own?
amend the
Yeah,
definition.
I mean.
Yeah, and my initial thought is to
From
go
the-
back through the use table and see if some of those, more desirable uses are actually already permitted or conditionally permitted. If there's maybe a more specific use, like a recycle center. I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to go and look it up, but those might be accommodated by existing uses. They might not.
That's fine, if
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, just.
just in me reviewing the code,
Yeah.
it seemed pretty cut and dried what was in and what was out.
Right.
But yeah, no,
So,
Yeah, that's-
I'm
I'm like, how do
close.
we
It's
get
just-
to
it's a
that?
definition thing of solid waste for
Right.
me.
so I think we're close to. I don't
Okay.
want to spend 8 years getting closer and closer on it,
Seven.
So I don't know how we go about coming up with another definition. How do we do that?
So
guess
I
that-
can.
that's my question.
I can take a look at it. I can shoot you guys an email and say, hey, here's maybe what is pre-existing that may alleviate that concern, or if we need to add something else. I don't know if I would necessarily love the idea of adding uses to after taking one away. I mean, we could, if there's something very specific that you want to see in those zones, like a plastic recycling facility or natural products or those types of things. We'd have to have more discussion. If it's
What
something we
about
want
just
to,
excluding what we don't want.
Well, because I mean, right, like
At the
the
end of the
gas,
day,
just things like in our Cache Valley where there is a lot of heavy winter air, maybe
Yeah.
something like that, we don't
Inversions.
want included
yeah,
in the community or the valley in general.
sure.
Even if they're great ideas, it might just be really hard in our
Yeah.
area.
Yeah, the other thing we could do is we could pull this out of the proposal and consider it as an additional amendment, spend more time thinking about it or understanding it better. But either way, we can add more detail to it in this proposal or pull it out.
Scott, are we looking at any kind of a plastic facility recycling where they would do more than what Logan City is, 3 through 7? I don't know how many, what the numbers are.
The recycling efforts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So my concern is there, if they want to move to that, is there someplace you can get rid of that? Or the number 5s and so forth, 3 through 7s, whatever they are,
yeah.
can you get rid of them or do you have to burn them?
I don't know specifically the details on how you recycle those different types of recyclables. I do know, however, that Logan City's facility would be in this definition of a solid waste facility. And that's something that right now we're saying is conditionally permitted in both the general commercial and the manufacturing areas. So you would have to tone it down and say this is not a solid waste facility as defined by state code. It's a different type of facility. You know, maybe a non-hazardous recycle facility, and then we have more specific definition as to what could be recycled in such a facility. And I'm kind of thinking off the top here. I'm not sure how to delineate, you know, the heavy solid waste versus the less intensive solid waste. I just know that this is a use in our code. By state definition, it could be very heavy of a use, or it could maybe be a little bit lighter, but still fit within that definition.
Again, moving forward on solid waste, or once we get to the solid waste movement for city itself, will we be precluded from taking anything to Logan City?
No, this has nothing to do with our agreements for
Okay.
existing trash. Yeah,
Okay.
those are regional efforts by multiple municipalities.
Okay.
So I get the sense that maybe we want to think about this a little bit more, but not. I don't know how we come up with the definition.
Sure.
I'm gonna ask staff to make some suggestions, or
Sure.
let's go
Yeah,
look and
yeah.
see what's out there. That's just I mean, the intent I have, I'm comfortable with the intent.
Yeah,
I don't wanna handcuff by just saying no to anything
Okay.
that's in the
So-
current definition.
So before we say no, we want some input from staff.
Sure. Yeah, I'll dissect it a little bit more on that particular use.
Because I think we're almost to the point where we're willing to dissect it, but we want a little more information.
Yeah.
Right? Is that
So-
what I'm sensing here, commissioners?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, so Jeff, you don't want to totally eliminate the definition of, or the inclusion of
as-
solid
as-
waste.
As
facilities.
written
stated.
right now, I just
Yeah.
think that it's extremely restrictive, and it's got, there's uses there that I don't personally think are against our general plan, or
Right.
what we would all be okay with.
Or that we're even aware of what possibly could be recycled in the future, or whatever the case may be, yeah.
Yeah.
So just refine the definition.
I think definition revision could get me
Mhm.
close
Yeah,
to the intent of
Yeah.
what we were
Okay.
trying to do.
Sounds good.
and Scott, I like the inclusion of the frontage and the sprinkling or the irrigation systems and things like that, so that's consistent
good.
with.
Yeah, those are pre-existing requirements that we felt we just leave be. So,
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other comments on large warehouse thoughts?
Well,
I think it looks good.
I like the 330, 660 idea also.
Okay.
I think I could.
No
work with
bigger,
that.
that'd be.
Yeah, the other thing is if we go bigger, you want to stick with either, you
Yeah.
know, a block or, you know, stick with like the grid system for, you know, circulation and connectivity. If you go up to 3 or 1320, it's you're looking to have very big opportunities. I mean, that's a Walmart opportunity, and those, we're not going to have those all up and down Main Street, excuse me. So I felt like the 330 to 660 is maybe a good compromise and a sweet spot.
And since this is my last meeting, we probably ought to include some signage requirements here too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dwight, would you just
As
leave
long
us
as
all, please?
as long as they're pole signs.
Yeah, right.
No, Jeff, you're not on that committee.
You
You're
didn't
out of
get on
there.
the committee.
I'm on that committee.
Me and Nan, we're gonna.
Okay.
But
Well, actually, we'll talk about that on.
City
no
offices.
pole
Big-
sign.
Big pole signs.
Moving right along.
I'm-
Dwight, thank you very much.
I like all the signs.
Let's talk about small storage.
I'll start.
We'll do, Scott, do you want to say anything?
As far
Well,
as the
it's all
small
part of
storage
the-
proposal, that's unchanged from the previous red line. You guys want to talk about that
Am I okay to talk
specifically?
now?
I guess. Depends on what you want to
Okay.
say.
Well, I'm just, yeah. I'm very, if you haven't learned by now, I'm very apprehensive to just all out X's. As I was with the large warehouses. Small unit facilities, we've had them come. And, there's never been a lot of discussion about them. There's demands and needs out there, and I think there's places that they can be. There's places we don't want them. Just like a lot of the different businesses. I mean, we just went through that exercise with the large here, and I think that's a fair compromise. I just hate the idea of saying that there's nowhere that could be where there's a need for them. There's a need for self-storage, just like there is multifamily and places to live. So as I was before, and I still am, apprehensive to just nix it all together. When we talked about this, the first meeting in November, not the November 17th, but the kind of the preliminary. My recollection in that meeting is that that staff was going to go back and consider areas that it might work out, or there might be appropriate areas within the city. Because of the conversation then and the one we had 2 weeks ago, that wasn't on the agenda. I've spent a lot more time, thinking about it and considering it. And at this point, I'm not comfortable just nixing it all together. But, I would like to consider areas that that might be a possibility, or there might be best uses for it. And so that's how I feel.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions on the small side of the
I was just
storage
gonna say,
question?
I think that I was under the impression that it was gonna just be reevaluated and determined based on the 10-year plan, what we want to do in the future, and just reallocate where land would be
As part of the general
appropriate
plan
to for
process.
the general plan process. So I was thinking it was more put on hold, not totally nixing, I guess putting a timeout on it for now. So I guess nixing, but then reallocating different land.
So what help me
That's what I-
understand, what's the apprehension to having them? I mean, why are we not putting everything on hold then?
Out in the western part of town. So I think it's more opportunity costs. I think we talked about, the landlocked nature of our city and the budgeting of land use and available developable land. And having very little direction in the way of long range planning. Obviously, there's uses that I think if you were to look at the use table, you would say that's probably, fine. It's general commercial. It's going to probably fit within a vision that we'll have of the western side of town continuing to be our economic hub and retail location in town. Other things, I think, solid waste facilities, it's probably not going to fit in that definition, in the true sense of a solid waste facility. Are we going to put a dump right out in the middle of our prime economic development land? I highly doubt it. So it's kind of just one of those things you look at and say, I don't think that will ever fit in any vision that we come up with through the general plan process. Some, I think we need to say time out on. I think where we have these large, potential developments of storage units, it's concerning from the sense of opportunity cost. Is that what we want to use up our scarce land from a land use perspective? I don't know. That's where the general plan might help us and might direct us more. So that was kind of the thought in this initial approach, is there's very little direction. So if we looked at the land use code, maybe there's a couple of things in here that we say, let's take a minute. We also have had multiple recent projects that expired for storage units, several acres. And we looked at that as an opportunity to say, maybe let's take a minute to talk about it. If that discussion goes in a direction that says, no, we think it's fine, let's just leave them there, then so be it. We close this discussion and those applicants can reapply and move forward with their project. But because we know that there's a general plan on the recent horizon, it's a good chance for us to say, we're not going to re-entertain those applications. We're going to take a look at this through the general plan. And then if the community says we need these opportunities and it makes sense in specific areas, then maybe we take a look at amending the code at that time. That's the thought process, at least on the proposal side.
And that's the thought process I like. I missed the meetings before this. I don't think it's totally nixed, but I agree. Other issues we've dealt with, we've said, let's step back and work on our general plan and make sense of what's happening in our city. So I'm okay with that. In my opinion, I think it's good to step back and get our general plan going and see and say, yeah, maybe this is a great place. But we don't want all of North Logan to be full of storage units or whatever. I think it's our responsibility to try and have a wise plan that will help our city in all aspects. So I'm okay with taking time to work on this general plan a little bit.
So my argument to that is that I'm okay with taking a step back, like on rezones and things that we haven't laid out. But there's things that are currently in the zoning. We're not going to fill up the city with storage units. I mean, there's a small section of area that they can go. And why storage units? Why aren't we picking on everything and saying everything's on hold till we get the
Well,
general plan?
I think we
I get
are.
it for rezoning.
I think we're kind of saying that though, Jeff. I think we're trying to.
Well,
look
anything
through
that's
this.
permitted
Anything that is
doesn't,
conditionally permitted
we
as
don't
well.
stop.
Well,
So keep in mind, a conditionally permitted use has to be approved.
Right.
If the developer can show how they are reasonably mitigating their impacts to their adjacent neighbors, then you have to approve them. There's no way about it. A rezone is a different question. That's a legislative act. You have discretion, wide discretion to say, is this in the best interest of the public, their health, safety, welfare, yes or no? Where if it's left in the table as a C or a P, then there's very little negotiation or consideration at that point. It's either yes or no. Does it comply? Yes or no? And it has to move forward. So this proposal would say we're taking it out of the table because otherwise there's no way for us to have that discussion. Now, the discussion would come in the way of the general plan. It would come in the way of future requests for a text amendment where a developer could come in and say, hey, we noticed that your use table says that this particular use is not permitted. We'd like to ask the question anew. Should this now be re-injected into the table? And they can formally request a text amendment, engage this same process and discussion, and then take it through to the legislative body. And if it's a good proposal, if it's a good plan, then the city council could say, let's put it back in and amend the code just as we're looking at doing here. So there's a process to do it, and that's where that pause could occur. The only way to really pause is to pull it out and say, at this time, we're not ready to entertain this type of a use until we have more direction.
yes. Anybody else comments on this?
Okay.
I'm wondering, are there areas in the city where you would think that small storage units could be?
And that's a good question. You would have to go through and do an analysis of where do we think it could be. And that's something that, we could do. I think the general plan will help us do that. It's a process that is soon to occur. The other thing that was in the back of my mind is with real estate, everything is about, location, access, visibility, location. You've heard the saying before. Particular uses, once they go into place, they set a trajectory and they then attract like uses. You kind of start going down a road and that trajectory is established. And at that point, it's much more difficult to recorrect to a new vision. We don't have a vision, so it's hard to tell what course we want to go.
Vision. It's just old,
It is old.
or 10 years
agree.
old or whatever it is.
Yep.
And we have to live with it because we're not going to have a new general plan for 2 more years.
It will be some time. You're right.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's again, the apprehension of the whole thing.
So if we were to put this on hold, say that's the route we ended up going in hopes of the general plan, and someone does come forward in that time and says, hey, I would really like I would like storage units. Can they work through a process if the plan, if it's presented or is it just like, no, for 2 years till the general plan comes out in the land? Just to make sure
Yeah.
anyone who's listening knows the process.
Let's be clear about what a hold means. So if we move forward as the proposal is now, it basically means it's not a permitted use. And we do not have to entertain an application for that type of a use. Since we've engaged this discussion, we have 6 months to work through it. And if we haven't come to any resolution, then we haven't amended the code. And even though we're talking about it, since it's taken longer than 6 months, technically an applicant could resubmit and they would be processed with their due process rights through our existing language. They would just move forward as if our language hasn't changed, because it hasn't. But if within those 6 months we have this discussion, we decide, let's go ahead and do this, and we pull it out of the code, then it would be indefinite until it's re-added back in. And that would require a very similar discussion to what we're having now.
Yeah, there's not really a pause. It just gets pulled out of the code and something would have to trigger.
It gets pulled out of the code until we discuss it.
Or
Well, something would have to trigger for us to, it doesn't automatically come back in if.
Right,
They
right.
would have to propose.
unless in the general plan, we have a goal that says, let's look at this use specifically and let's have that discussion, even if it's not brought forward by a member of the public or an applicant. Then that would be a self-initiated discussion. Or, after the general plan goes through, a developer says, I would like to look at this use again and submit a formal request to do so. Then we could have that discussion based on that request. We're not obligated to, move forward with it if we still think it's a bad idea, or if we, want to say no, then we have the discretion at that time to do so.
I'm sorry, you can't comment at this meeting, so sorry, that's how the rules work. Later, after, maybe.
Sure.
So what do you think, commission? Jeff says no. I say, let's think about it.
Well,
No.
I'm not saying all out no, I don't like it just being completely nixed. If we want to look at places that might be better suited or some kind of compromise like we've done on the large warehouse, then I'm certainly at the table to discuss. I'm uncomfortable with just completely removing it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the opportunity we have. We have
A
a while to think about it.
You
to
have,
talk
you have
about.
some time. I mean, obviously time goes quickly. It would be helpful from a staff's perspective to get feedback as to what maybe you would be comfortable with, a direction to pursue as far as maybe staff analysis to say, well, if we're really just not comfortable as proposed, then what would we be comfortable and make a recommendation? You can always make a negative recommendation, just say, we just don't like this. And we're just going to say, we don't have a positive recommendation as it's currently drafted. And then the city council would have to decide if they want to move on your recommendation or not.
We don't need to make a motion, do we?
No, we're
At this
not.
point, Yeah, it's,
Not making
yeah.
any recommendations.
So I think, Scott, you've got the sense from, albeit somewhat mixed, but you at least have some sense of our concerns and frustrations here.
Sure.
Well, I haven't heard, I'd like to hear them. I mean, your
I-
opinion only matters tonight, but
No.
Karen
Yeah.
and Dwight, I'd like to see what your thoughts are on this.
I'd like to see from Scott, are there areas where small storage units would work fine?
We'd have to do some analysis to make
And
that
that's, I'd like to
determination.
see where you would say, from your expert opinion, because I don't have that background
Mhm.
of city planning and all that kind of thing. I'm a newbie on this thing, so I think we could use small storage units in the city. I think there's a place for them.
Mhm.
But I'd like to see where, based on your expertise and knowledge, where they would work.
Dwight?
Yeah, I also agree that I think there's a place and a need for small storage units within the city limits, and it's just a matter of where and when and how and all those things. Similarly to the solid waste, probably premature to X those out of our discussion here, and
There's probably a
Planning.
plastic bag facility that wants to come in and supply your nonprofit.
that's already happening there.
Oh, my-
That's
I
all.
think that, oh, sorry, Dwight,
No, that's-
keep going. Sorry.
no, just to answer that question, yeah, Walmart's already subcontracting to Trex.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
all your plastic bags that don't go into sleeping mats are going into Trex decking material.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
So
Walmart and Smith's.
getting back
Sorry
to here, I think Scott made an interesting comment a while ago about, and I don't know how you said it, Scott, but businesses attract similar
There's a-
businesses.
Trajectory, yeah.
And I think I think that's true. And certainly, I think in our city, there could be a spot for some small storage units. But I don't think we want all of 2500 North to be storage units, just like we don't want all of 2500 North to be car washes like we have, you know.
Mhm.
So I think it's important. I think it's our job to look at our city and make wise decisions, not on the spur of the moment, not what we think, not what I want to go in and build 15 storage units on my property. I think we have to look at all of the ideas here. And so that's why I'm saying, let's take a minute. Let's look and see where this might work, where it might not work. In the meantime, somebody can come in with a conditional use permit and get it and build a storage unit, right?
Not within the
the
6
zone
month
area.
period of time.
Yeah.
But yes, if we don't make a decision within 6 months, then now that would be the case.
But we have 6 months to work on this.
From when we initially had
November
this
5th.
discussion, yeah, beginning of November.
So we have 4 months to work on this. So I think we should make this a priority and work on it and get it done and not push it down the road and not fight about it. Let's just, is that possible, Scott? Is it possible to get some input from staff, from the city?
Yeah.
That we can look at and say, this is what we like, this is what we don't like, this is what we see the future.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, my initial thoughts are if we wanted to put together, you know, more detailed thought on the question of where versus taking the pause and waiting for the general plan to help us with that answer. You know, we would have to determine certain criteria. What variables are we measuring in that decision? Initially, what comes to my mind is I think about this as a regional discussion because North Logan is a small portion of Cache Valley. Cache Valley is our community. I think we can all agree Cache Valley is home, even though we live in North Logan. And the separation between our north, south, east, west boundaries is maybe a 5-minute drive. You know, we're not a big community, and having regional amenities is also part of the discussion. How far away do you actually have to drive to pick up storage 2, 3, 4 times a year? You know, I think a 10-minute drive, 15-minute drive isn't unreasonable. And then the question is do they need to be right next to, you know, where you live? Are we expecting people to walk to these facilities? I don't think so, because you don't go to your storage unit to pick up one thing and carry it home. Usually you take your pickup truck or your van and you pick up a few seasonal items and then take them back. So there's some anecdotal things there. If we want to get into splitting the hairs on an analysis, that's, you know, we can do that if we want to be more certain before. I think the initial approach to this topic was more, we know we want more direction through long range visioning, and the general plan will provide that for us. But if we're not comfortable, we're not comfortable. And I'm totally happy to, entertain more discussion and do more analysis. It would be helpful to know specific questions of the commission as far as when we're talking about what are we measuring? Are we talking distance? What is a reasonable distance to one of these? What is the reasonable trade-off if we're wanting this use? What is maybe what are the other uses we would prefer or would like to incentivize? Maybe some other. These are just spitball questions kind of going through my mind as I'm thinking through some of these topics.
Even if locations are determined, if they're all in the same zoning, what that.
It makes it difficult because we don't have just a
Yeah,
very
that's what
specific
I-
zoning classification to apply to
And that's where
property.
I think that this all kind of started is like, there's some similar stuff off of Main Street versus on Main Street, and it's all the same
It's a
zone.
hodgepodge.
And that's where I think that
Yeah.
that kind of started as saying, well, we don't want this on Main Street, but then where there's
Yeah.
some similar zoning. And so then I think that gets
And
that gets tricky for
Well,
people
I,
who want
yeah,
storage units to build versus where would it be best? And so that it is hard to
And-
just cut it off. So I can see your point, but then I can see that there's a lot of red. And so like, where's the right spot?
there's not as much
And
red as
that-
we would wish there was.
Well,
Okay.
well,
Yeah,
okay.
we
there's-
wish we
But-
could grow our red, don't you?
There's even,
Yeah, I mean, and I just,
that's-
again, to give I like what we've done with the large,
yeah,
let's find the no areas. But, the rest of that, we may have to let the free market determine if they get. built
determine
there.
Sure.
if that's.
So how many small storage units do we have in North Logan right now?
the one that's
Areas.
2,500.
I can think of two.
Yeah.
Right, actual
Weston's and,
facilities. I don't have a unit count. We could.
I don't worry about units. I'm saying areas.
Actual.
There's
facilities.
Weston and then there's the one up by the
agree.
veterinary clinic that's just
Yeah.
east up there.
Yeah,
Is there any place else?
we can pull up the exhibit we looked at back in November. As far as there's a
There's
map we put
maybe one
together.
more.
But keep in mind, when we looked at that map, not all of them are labeled. Not all of them have Google advertising where we can go onto Google Maps and see all of them. There's a couple that we missed. I think one was on 1800 North by Cal Ranch. There's one over by the vet clinic, just south of the high school. And there's one out on Airport Road, just to the south. I think it's actually in Logan City.
It's in
one
Logan
that's just
City.
barely.
Yeah,
Yeah, so those three for sure, I know are right within that vicinity. And then we have a few up in Smithfield as well. There's several on the west end of Logan City, a few out in Hiram.
So what's our sense here? What are we saying, commission?
I think I was pretty clear.
Well, yeah, Jeff is pretty clear. I'm pretty clear. I want to work on a general plan and get it
Yeah.
get it figured out. That's what I would like to do.
I would like to make this a priority and go for it. Get it solved instead of just.
Well, Madam
Very
Chair,
good.
we're, based on what you were saying, you're not opposed to continuing a classification of small storage units, correct? It's just a part of one, maybe you want it moved up on the agenda as part of the general plan or.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to have a plan. I think I look at communities, I look at the community that I grew up in. I don't think they ever had a plan. And it's out of control. And so, and I see what Jeff's saying.
We have a plan.
Well, we do have a plan, but
It's-
we're working on
it's just-
updating our plan.
Sure, but that
And-
doesn't mean the plan's invalid.
No, it doesn't. But I think we have these issues that are going to come up that we need to address.
Well, and that's where I guess
So-
I'm arguing. I don't understand what the issue is. And if self-storage is an issue, what other issues do we need to be considering? Because there's tons of land use out there and we're picking on self-storage.
Because I guess that's the issue that came up. I'm sorry I missed the first
Yeah,
self-storage meeting.
it's not supposed to be picking on one particular use. Staff saw this as an opportunity to have a discussion. We had two actually three uses that expired and have not moved forward. And so with it having expired, it's like, let's talk about it. We have an opportunity. Why not talk about it? So we have 6 months to talk about it. And here we are talking about it. It's not that I mean, you could widen this rabbit hole and go forever if you looked at every single use in the use table. And that wasn't the initial intent. It was, hey, here's a use. We had a couple of projects that have not moved forward. Maybe before we re-entertain those projects, maybe let's look at it. I am a new community development director. I have fresh eyes coming into the city from, other perspectives. And I saw this as, hey, I don't know that you guys have ever really had this discussion. And maybe it's a good time to shed some light. It's part of maybe a benefit of having new staffers take a look at things anew, read the code through from top to bottom anew. There's a lot of things in our code that I have a list of. We're going to talk about another one of them on our agenda tonight about design review that is, in my opinion, lacking. And so those are part of the reason why we're having this discussion. So it's not intended specifically to pick on any particular use. It was an opportunity that was seen as, hey, we are given this by the state code to say, if we want to take a look at a use and we don't have any applications currently that are in the process, we can do so and have some time to have that discussion. That's what that 6 months is for.
And that's what I would like to do. If you want to know what I would like to do, I don't think we're picking on anybody. We have the opportunity to work on this idea. So let's do it.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's disagreeing.
Okay.
Let's do it.
So I tried to keep the scope more narrow. I did see solid waste as maybe a low hanging fruit to say, hey, this is probably not that contentious. And it's probably right along the same vein of before we put a general plan together, this might be something we'll just want to pull out. Anecdotally, Nibley City had an application for a use. They had no idea it was in their land use table. Apply, and they were caught off guard, and they were not happy with the fact that they just weren't aware. Just the conversation hadn't been had. So this is an opportunity for us to maybe catch one of those if we feel that it is an undesired thing to have at the present time. Maybe not. That's why we're having this discussion.
Yep.
So I feel like it's a good time to have a discussion. Anybody else? Okay, Scott,
Okay,
let's go.
appreciate the feedback.
Let's go to item number 2. Where are we on? 3.
Okay.
Very well. The night I was in charge, we stayed right to the minute.
Did you get to talk about stats?
Is that what your timer was for over there?
Timer went off a long time ago.
You were letting her know
Okay, it's your fault.
she over.
Yeah.
All right, you guys
We'll
want to?
whip through this.
It's always been my fault.
We'll whip through this in fast.
Okay, I've got a lot of documentation here. I don't expect you to be able to review all of this right here, right now. This is a very first discussion on what is our design review process. Design review is where before we issue a building permit on particular uses, we review the design of their site, their building, their circulation, their landscaping, before we issue that building permit. Our design review process, as is the same with most municipalities, pertains to commercial, industrial, institutional, anything that's not, single family residential. Multifamily is usually grouped into a design review process. And when I first came on, we had the AmeriCord. I don't know if you guys remember if that ever came before you with your previous director. AmeriCord is a company that makes extension cords and products like that. And they're looking for a new facility. They own some land over in the general commercial zone. And they submitted a building permit request for their new building. And that was a first application I was looking at the land use code and our current provisions for design review. And as I read through it, I felt like this was very, very different than most municipalities. The primary difference is we have several sets of design guidelines, and we don't have objective standards through which to review. So it's kind of like, well, here's a guideline. It says maybe you should have it look like this. Maybe you should try to follow this architectural theme. And it's really hard for any design review process to say, you guys need to add a sidewalk here. You guys need to have X number of trees. Your massing needs to be broken up. Certain just basic design elements are hard for us to have any teeth. Really, it's just suggestions. And then our design review process is through a design review committee, and it's a separate body appointed by the mayor through members who are maybe more design focused in their professional pursuits. So right now we have a design review committee with some interior designers, realtor type of a makeup. And it's a bit strange getting together with that committee and saying, well, the design guidelines say this, but we really can't stick any of that as requirements. So it's a bit strange. What I did with this first document is I just threw everything in our code that pertains to design review. Let's see. So you'll have that document there. There's a couple of sections that speak to it, and it's very brief. So the first section is section 12B-500. It's under our administrative language, where this is all we've got to go off of as far as this design review body. Let me zoom in a little bit more here. So the mayor or such other person or persons designated by the mayor is responsible for an initial review of all applications for building permits and charged with the duty to approve and or attach conditions to design plans and design review applications in accordance with the intent, purpose, and standards for design review established pursuant to 12C-1101D. Now that section is only architectural standards when we look further down. It says this initial review shall be limited only to appearance, site planning, design, and general layout, and may not require full working drawings. And that's all we've got as far as this board is concerned. When we get further down, sorry, this thing is hard to zoom in and out on. We've got a couple different sections that reference design review. So one of these sections we've just recently been reading in for the small multi-unit storage and large warehouse type storage indicates that we're supposed to review some fencing and screening for these storage facilities through a design review process. That's one indication or one section of code that references it. Under our signage ordinance, there's a section that says that for any painted signs or super graphics, which are kind of large murals on the sides of buildings, that those should go through a design review process. This is kind of more of that signage code saying that those painted signs need to be reviewed. And then you get down into the city center code, and that's where the rubber kind of hits the road, where anything that is ever developed in the city center goes through a design review process. So that's all the residential in the city center, in addition to the commercial, institutional types of uses. The last section, so I'm just kind of scanning through these city center code references. Okay. When you get down to 12C-1100, that's actually in our zoning ordinance, and it's specific site development requirements for let's see, commercial, industrial, institutional, residential, and non-residential developments. So any of those types of uses in these particular zones, so not specifically residential zones, need to go through a design review process. And in this section, there is several components. There's landscaping, there's architecture. So that's where that previous set of language said that we should review architecture, but it doesn't say we review anything else like landscaping or circulation or connectivity or lighting or any of the traditional things you would expect to review on a commercial project. Okay, so I just wanted to point out real quick where in our code it talks about design review. What's interesting is you can tell that this has been changed over time, and we have some references to a design review board, and we have some references to a design review committee. And the design review board language was stricken quite some time ago, but there's still some remaining language, and it just doesn't quite jive when you read through the different sections. of how do we manage this design review process. It's not super clear what we're supposed to do when these types of applications come in. Okay, so let's hop into the next document.
Well, Scott, before we go forward, those clarifications and consistency, does that require a change from a motion from, well, probably and or approval ultimately by the city council?
It would, excuse me, it would. So it would be an amendment to our text for us to be able to straighten things out and line them up and put them in a way that is more concise. You know, we'd have to do some amendments. What I hope to achieve today is just to educate you on what our process is, help you understand what maybe some other cities do, maybe some best practices, and then have an initial discussion of potential amendments to come down the road that would help us maybe get more on track with what is a cleaned up process, so to speak.
Thanks.
Okay. So I put this second document together just as a comparison. So the first page is North Logan City. We've kind of gone through that already, where we have a land use authority being this design review committee appointed by the mayor. Our appeal authority is if, for example, there's an appeal to that decision, it goes through our administrative appeals hearing officer, which is a local attorney who has been appointed to that role. One thing that is unique to our process as compared to others is that we do have these design guidelines. There's a design guideline for the city center. There's a design guideline for commercial. There's a design guideline for manufacturing. Most other cities don't have guidelines. They just have standards that are part of their code. And that's easier for someone who is reviewing to say, here's the requirement. Do you meet it? Yes or no, instead of a guideline, so to speak. So just to hop down, coming from Weber County, I'm familiar obviously with their code, so it's easy for me to reference and bring up. What's interesting about their process is they have two different tracks. So if it's a small project, it's less than 10,000 square feet or less than 1 acre in size, then that is actually just reviewed internally by a staff member. For Weber County, it's just their planning manager who reviews that with help from their staff. If it's a larger project, if it's over 10,000 square feet in floor area or impacts more than 1 acre, then it goes to their planning commission, and the planning commission reviews their design review. And then they have specific considerations for traffic, any signage, landscaping, the site layout, any easements or engineering concerns. And then if there's, for example, a development agreement that has already addressed some of these design considerations, it's part of their review. For example, if you have a master plan project come through or a rezone that has a development agreement that was negotiated as part of a previous approval, then that needs to be considered. So what they actually build matches what was agreed upon in a development agreement or a rezone discussion. Logan City, very similar to Weber County in the fact that they've got two tracks. They have an administrative track through their planning director, and then they have a planning commission track. What's maybe a little bit unique about Logan City is that they use their planning commission as a way to potentially grant variances or slight modifications to the standards. Where if, for example, there's a proposed project and they want to propose something unique that doesn't fit within the specific standard, then the planning commission can look at that and say, it still is within the intent of the zoning. It still meets, the desire of that neighborhood in their zoning ordinance. And it also matches the surrounding, built environment, and then it'll blend right in, and they have the discretion to do small, have some wiggle room, I guess you could say. That's unique about Logan's process. They also add a public notice and a public hearing if it goes before the planning commission, which is a little bit unique because it's an administrative type of a decision. So typically you don't have public input and comment on an administrative decision because, again, you have to approve it if it meets the standards. Okay, so that's Logan City. Salt Lake City, again, very similar, administrative review and then a planning commission review. And theirs is, very similar to Logan City, where their planning commission has some leeway in their decision making. Okay. Lastly, Providence, what was unique about Providence is that their administrative review isn't just one individual. It isn't just their planning director. It is a smaller committee of city staff. So their community development director, their public works director, and their city engineer, which is nice because then you have a few more eyeballs on it and the decision isn't just one person's to make. So that's something I thought was a good idea there. Lastly, let's just hop into this proposed design review structure. And let's not take a ton of time on this because I know the evening's getting late. But what this essentially is an outline of maybe how we can become a little bit more standard in our design review process, a little bit more predictable and have some more organization. I do think it's a good idea to have administrative review where smaller projects can get through the process a little bit quicker. I do like the Providence approach where it's not just one individual making that decision. It's a little bit of you have a few more coconuts, in the room trying to look at these things. But I also like the planning commission looking at some larger projects or, projects in specific areas. For example, I think it's a good idea that the planning commission review all of the city center development when and if we get development in that area, because it's a critical, area of the town. But that also, you may like the idea of public input. You may like that component. We could add that if you want to have public input on an administrative item. Some more specific application requirements. It would be nice to have the applicant actually provide a narrative of how they believe their project fits into our standards. So that they've actually read them and they are designing to those standards versus submitting something and hoping it matches. That's something that I think would be a good idea. And a couple other things here, some exceptions. It doesn't really make sense to make somebody go through a conditional use process, a design review process. Let's have one process that can hit multiple birds with one stone. Let's establish a timeline. Let's not have these things be open-ended. Give them 18 months to make progress, or if they need more time, they can request an extension. And then allow for minor modifications as they actually get to work on their project. Maybe there's certain things that they learn along the way that they'd like to modify and have a way for them to modify their approval if need be. But this is just an initial, I wanted to throw this out there to you guys, let you know our process is not great. There's a lot of room for improvement. And I think there's a direction I'd like to propose, and we'll get into more of that a little bit later on. Any questions on the process? You're welcome to read through this.
I think these are great suggestions, Scott.
Okay. We'll talk
I
more
like it.
about this, so we'll give you more time to read it before we have another discussion.
Great. It's okay with everybody? We can move
Yeah.
on?
I think
Well-
I wanted to help other
Yeah.
people move their stuff along.
Are
Yeah,
you, what are you saying, Heather? Not
I just was saying, I think
Yeah.
it'll be great
Speak into the mic.
if we can make this better for
Yes.
people to move things along without getting hung up
Yeah.
with the last process.
No, I agree that the process is
Slow
been
and
a bit of a mess.
functional.
Yeah.
I like a lot of
Yeah.
the suggestions.
I like your suggestions, Scott, I think.
Okay.
And the 10,000 square foot criteria seems to be a reasonable.
Yeah.
Division,
Right there.
administrative versus commission.
Okay.
Level
Should have threw
review.
this
Good
storage
job.
unit in with this.
Should we do 9,999 or?
Let's just keep it 10.
Yeah.
Okay, let's not even talk
Well-
about that anymore. I think I
Full
think this
size.
looks good, and I would like to read through it and
Yeah, for
work
sure.
on
I don't expect you guys to have a lot of comment at this point because there's a lot to read through. When you try to look at this, you're flipping through multiple sections of code and it's hard to wrap your head around it in any short amount of time. So we'll get into the weeds later on.
looks good. All right, let's move on. Staff business discussion.
Yeah, I think, so I do have an item I would like to bring up. We actually talked about this with the city council last night with regards to process and how we were making land use decisions. But maybe let's wait until the next meeting, if you're okay to do that with our new planning commissioner and have her be a part of that discussion, just so she's in the loop. happy to go through it if you want to spend more time this evening, but it would be okay to push it.
We'd
I
love
don't
to
know, I
spend
think
more
Luke
time
would
this evening,
like to.
but
You want,
I think that that's a good idea.
Okay.
The new commissioner should
Yeah.
be involved in that. Anything else, Scott, there?
No, from a staff business, that's the only thing I had planned to discuss, but we can discuss that in a couple weeks.
Okay, makes sense. Planning Commission business. Anybody else have anything you want to say?
Just
wanna-
once again, thank you very much for your patience.
And thank you,
Dwight.
Dwight.
Thank you for your voice of reason.
Yes, we appreciate.
I've needed it.
I think we've gone along pretty good considering. Okay, next meeting, February 2nd.
Okay.
Everybody knows that? We need a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved by Karen and seconded by Dwight, I think. All in favor?
Hi.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott, for your
Yep.
work.